beach read. I mean, need I say more? Beaches and reading. Two of my favorite things and two amazing things. So the book titled Beach Read obviously has to be amazing. It follows two authors who live in beach houses that are right next to each other, and they teach opposite kind of genres. Gus only writes like depressing and realism and sad endings, and January only writes romance and happily ever afters. And so they decide to spend the summer teaching each other about their respective genres. And so to do that, they have to go on a ton of adventures, and it's a total rom-com in a book, and I love it. And it's literally like so perfect, like for reasons I will get into in the spoilery section. It is like the perfect book. Oh my, I like love and adore and cherish this book, and it's going down as one of my favorite books ever. And it's just beautiful and perfect and sappy and romantic, and it just is amazing. And this episode is going to be so fun to do, and everybody should go read it because it's amazing. Books, TV, music, and movies. All things that make a big impact on everyone. I'm constantly gushing about my latest read to anyone who listens, so I figured I'd turn my rambling into something coherent that people might actually listen to, which means no tuning out halfway through. I'm Maya Ghosh, and this is my take. So, as always with a book, we're going to start on the writing, and it was pretty typical book writing. I mean, January had some sort of inner monologue a little bit woven through there, but it was weird because it didn't always happen. It was just like, oh, here's a little bit of inner monologue in the beginning, and then we'll throw in like bits and pieces of inner monologue throughout, but it wasn't like consistent enough for it to actually be like, oh, she is a solid inner monologue. It was just kind of sparse. Like, if you've read 50 Shades of Grey, it wasn't like Anna's subconscious and inner goddess that popped up every 2 seconds. It was like sparse, but it was fine. It didn't detract from anything. Like, it wasn't like, oh, I need more of her inner monologue, because we got her perspective anyway, so it was fine. But I did just have to, mention that. But again, pretty typical book writing. The other thing I need to point out is the descriptions of Gus's facial hair. Like, the first time she sees him, she's describing him, and she's like, and that just past 5 o'clock shadow. Like, you could have just said 5 o'clock shadow. You really didn't need to add the just past. It didn't make it that much big of a difference. But wait, there's more. Later on in the book, she's describing him, and his facial hair is described as a 7 o'clock dusk. Like, okay, at least just past 5 o'clock shadow makes sense, right? Like, the stereotypical thing is it'll be a 5 o'clock shadow. And so, like, just past is like, okay, it's a little bit more than, like, stubble on his face. But what the fuck is a 7 o'clock dusk? Like, really, I want to know what a 7 o'clock dusk is. Like, what? It made me laugh, because I was like, this is not that deep. I don't care that much about the specific length of his facial hair, but it just made me laugh, so I had to include it in the writing. But overall, the writing was really good, and it wasn't like amazing, right? It was standard book writing, but it wasn't trashy, which I appreciate, because I feel like a lot of rom-com books get the idea of like, oh, it's trashy or bad writing or whatever, but it wasn't. It really wasn't. And this book actually does go into like depth on romance as a genre and stuff, and I'll get into all of that later. But the writing was good. We're moving on. I'm just gonna like go through kind of their story and what happens and what I like and all that stuff. Like, there's not a ton of specific, like, I'm not going character by character or anything. We're just gonna like talk about the book. There's no order to this. I'm just going. So, to start with their story, I love it, obviously. I am a sucker for romance, and as much as, like, my Me Before You episode was so fun, because that's, like, a rom-com, that was, like, a really sad, depressing rom-com. this is just like a happy, fluffy, stereotypical rom-com, even though, like, not detracting from it, right? Like, it's a really great book, and it really does go into depth on some things. I'm not trying to be like, oh, it's just your classic rom-com. It's not. It's a really great book, but it also is, like, that typical romance genre that I adore so much. So, like, I love this book. If you can't already tell, I love this book. And I love the bet and how it comes along and how it gives them a purpose for falling in love. Like, that's one thing I appreciated about this book, because I will read books that are just straight fluff and romance and the only plot point is them falling in love, right? I will read that. I don't care. But this book actually did kind of have a little bit of a plot, and, like, they're trying to teach each other about their other genres, and they're trying to educate each other, and they go on these adventures, and it's not just, like, they're going on these adventures because they're falling in love. It's they're going on these adventures with a purpose, and then they fall in love because of it. So, yeah. I appreciated that, because I think it makes it more accessible to people who are, like, kind of romance snobs and stick their nose up and be like, oh, they're just falling in love. Like, no, there's actually a really interesting concept to this book. Thank you very much. And so all of the places that they go to because of their bet, like when they go to the book club and then she's so drunk, he takes her to get donuts to sober up, which is now my new strategy. Like, going into college, if anybody needs sobering up, I'm going to take them to get day-old donuts and bad coffee. That is my new strategy. The fact that she takes him to the carnival, which I love carnivals and fairs, and, like, there are not enough of them near where I live, so I really want to go on, like, a carnival or a fair date. So the fact that she took him to a carnival, I was like, yes, like, lived for that moment. Also the drive-in, which I will get to in a little bit, but if you've read this book, you know the drive-in, like, shit goes down at the drive-in. I loved it. I loved it. Line dancing, which is so out of the blue, because they're in, like, Michigan when this book is set. That is the one thing I will say about this book, is it said beach read, and I was like, oh, okay, like, I thought it was somewhere on the East Coast beaches, like South Carolina or, you know, Florida or Georgia or something, but it's in Michigan on, like, a lake beach, which gives it more character, and it's not like a stereotypical southern, like, beach kind of thing. I appreciated that, but it took a little while to get used to, because my brain is so programmed, I think, from reading too many Nicholas Sparks books to think about small southern town beaches. Anyways, line dancing in Michigan, and, like, I love where she was like, oh, angry line dancing is a thing that I've never tried, but it was great. And, like, I don't know why, but angry line dancing just seems like a mood. Like, I can picture January in my mind, like, stomping her way through a line dance, and I love having that image. Like, just my love for this book. I can't. Their trip to New End, which is where more shit goes down, and just, like, all of the trips that they took because of the bet, I loved and I appreciated, and it was amazing. And speaking of some of the things like the drive-in and New End, the amount of times they almost fucking kissed and then didn't was maddening. Like, obviously that's a trope of, like, a lot of romance books, is like, oh, you think they're gonna kiss? Bitch, you thought. But it still does not make it any easier to read, no matter how much practice I've had with dealing with it. And, like, that time where they're getting gas and he has to, like, lean in to tell her something, so he leans all the way into her ear and she can feel his lips brush up against her ear, and she's all, like, hot and bothered when he gets away and walks off all smug and fine and unaffected. Like, a staple of romance books, but also continuing to be maddening. And I was like, why can't you just fucking kiss already? So that was why, when they finally made out at the drive-in, I was so happy. Like, they're great, and I love them, and it's amazing, and them making out in the drive-in, well, you know, it is a public place, and there were kids around, and they did get kicked out. I appreciated that they were finally doing something, so we can look past the fact that it happens at a drive-in. But then, you know, as is the way of romance books, nothing doesn't pan out for another 100 pages or so. They're just awkward and don't talk about the fact that they kissed and there's fireworks between them and whatever. They just move on, which, why the fuck do you have to just move on? No, you should talk about your shit and realize you love each other right then and there. But, you know, romance, you gotta drag it out for forever. So then the basement scene made me really happy after, you know, they're just gonna make out at the drive-in and not talk about it. And, like, the banter while they're fucking is so, like, I love that their banter, which I love throughout the entire book, their banter is, like, so funny, and I love it, and just makes me laugh so hard when I would read it. But I love that continues while they're fucking, and she's like, he's holding her up against the bookshelf, and she's like, do you always fuck against your books? Is it an ego thing? Like, that! I love that, and that scene was so great, and I was so happy that they were finally, like, realizing that they liked each other, and realizing that there was a connection, and realizing they should do something about it. But then, of course, she acts fucking weird about it, and when he's, like, taking her to the 4th of July party, and he's like, oh no, like, don't come to the bathroom with me, and she thinks it's weird that he doesn't want to fuck at the cookout, which, like, it's not. Like, I've never been in a relationship, so I can't say anything, but, like, to me, it felt like common sense and respect for his aunt and, like, for his aunts, that they were not gonna, like, get it on in the bathroom and, like, ignore everybody, and he was just gonna, like, be respectful and actually be a good guest at that party. Like, I was very mad at her for that, because I was like, okay, there are some instances in romance books where I'm like, okay, this misunderstanding is just a big misunderstanding, and as a reader, I'm very mad at it, but as trying to embody the character, I can see where they'd get mad. But this is not one of those instances. This is one of those instances where I needed to jump in through the book and slap her upside the head and be like, no, he's just being respectful, like, fuck you. So I was very mad that they were all weird and shit. And then the trip to New End, and they sort all of their shit out, and they, you know, fuck again in the tent, and it's great, and we love it. And he's like, pulls out snacks, and she's like, you packed provisions? And he was like, yeah, I'd hope we'd be here for a while. Like, it was great. I loved it. And then the fact that they confess their love on the beach, and they agree that they're like, okay, we're not going to focus about a happily ever after. We're going to focus on a happy right now. And then they dance in the fucking rain. Like, all the time she teased him about, like, learning to dance in the rain. And then they actually dance in the fucking rain. Like, my happiness at that moment was, like, peak. Like, you couldn't get me any happier than, like, reading the fact that they were dancing in the rain. Like, it was amazing. And then, obviously, you know, we skipped to a 9-month gap, and I was, like, very concerned. I was like, why are you skipping 9 months? What's going on? I want to read what's going on in those 9 months, because I want all of the fluff and, like, daily relationships. Like, I would pay Emily Henry, who's the author of this book, to write me another book the same size, but just of those 9 months of happiness in their relationship, because I want to read it. Like, is it too much to ask? To ask for just the fluff happy of, like, normal relationships, and, like, where they fall into their groove, and, like, get not only all the cute build-up, but also all the cute dating, and all the cute like, I just want it all. I want all of their happiness, and I don't like that it was a 9-month gap, but I did appreciate that out of the 9-month gap, we got a proposal, which was so cute, too, because he's like, look, it's my birthday, and I have a really shitty memory of my wife leaving me on my birthday, so I'm going to make this new memory, and I'm going to propose, and I'm going to hold up a sheet of paper like we used to hold up in the window, and ask you to marry me through it. Like, it was so beautiful, and I loved it, and I loved the way it happened, and, like, it was just great. Like, their whole relationship was so good, and, like, yes, it did have their rough, weird patches, and, you know, Gus didn't tell January that he was divorced, and then after she found out or something happened, he, like, up and left and didn't talk to her for, like, 4 days, and all that stuff, but, like, I appreciated that nothing was ever, like, nuclear. And I kind of said this in Fangirl, right? Like, they had a very similar relationship where they always kind of talked to each other and worked their shit out and didn't, like, let these stupid little fights, like, blow up something really good. Like, there was no instance where they were like, oh my god, I'm completely done with you. I can't believe you would have done that. Like, what the fuck? We're gonna break up and I'm gonna be super sad and eat ice cream. Like, yes, there was the instance where, you know, she needed to call Shadi and Shadi came to her and all of that stuff. But, like, nothing was ever, like, so terrible that they couldn't come back from it. And they always was, like, growth, which is so nice. Like, after she angry line dances, they have, like, a good argument outside, and it leads to, like, better communication, and that communication leads to a better connection between the two of them, which I'm pretty sure is how real relationships work. Like, people actually talk through their shit. They don't just have one argument and the whole world explodes. So I appreciated that we got a relationship that was more nuanced, and it wasn't just like, oh, you can either be happy and fluffy or you have to be sad and depressed and have a fight. Like, there was nuance and arguments and a good description of what I think real relationships are like. So I appreciated that, and I loved that about this book. And it wasn't just a cliche romance book, but it did have all of those cliche moments that we love in romance novels, you know? And speaking of things that I loved, I'm going to go through a list of things that I loved in this book, starting with Pete and Maggie, who were the best, and they were so kind and amazing and nice and just great characters and amazing side characters, and I loved them, and they were awesome, and, like, so just, I loved them. They were amazing. And speaking of side characters who are amazing, Shadi, who is hilarious, and she's all like, oh my god, I can't believe it, I'm falling in love, this is terrible news, and, like, I love the fact that she's like, oh my god, is there a sex dungeon in the basement? And then later on, they start their fucking session in the basement, which was great. And she's just an amazing friend, because even though she's, like, struggles to get time off and stuff, and then she does end up spending 4th of July with her new boyfriend, she's like, you know, like, if you need me, I'm coming to you, and I'm gonna be there for you, and I'm gonna take out time off of work, and I'm gonna show up and be an amazing friend. So she had a really great balance of, like, even though she wasn't physically where January and Gus were, like Pete and Maggie, she was still a really big player in the book, and she was still an amazing friend and could show that she could be an amazing friend even though they were not in the same area. Like, Shadi was just great, and I loved her. I also loved the Red, White Russians, and Blue book club, and I loved all of the different, like, variations of that January and Gus talked about, where they're like, I don't remember them exactly because I didn't write them down, but it was like red-blooded, white Russian, blue collar book club or something like that they said. Like, I love that name, and it was great. I love the book club, and obviously, like, the book club scene and the fact that it leads to, you know, sobering up donuts. Like I said earlier, their banter was just, it was amazing. And I think, like, in the notes I took while writing this book, I literally just wrote their banter in all caps because I loved their banter, and it was great, and it was amazing. It was so funny, and it gave so much to the book, and I loved it. And the window notes were so cute, and I love when he was, like, wrote down his phone number, and she was like, I'm still gonna write notes, and he was like, good, I'm glad. Like, I loved that they had that, and it was so cute, and it was just, it was so perfect. Like, I loved it. It was amazing. Page 145, which in its entirety says, I dreamed about Gus Everett and woke up needing a shower, which I think is another romance staple where you, like, there's some talk about having a dream that's, like, kind of steamy or kind of like, oh my god, I shouldn't have been dreaming about him type of thing. So I love page 145. Also, speaking of page numbers that I love, page 251, where January goes, how do you know I didn't come here to seduce you? And Gus's smile crooked higher, because you wouldn't have had to, which, like, aww, like, he's just admitting that he really liked her and that, you know, he was down and, like, wanted to be with her, and, like, it just, the way it came out in the conversation was so smooth, and I loved it. And I love the way Gus leans against things, too. It's really funny and gives me Levi vibes, because Levi's always leaning, so I love it. And I love that they have, like, this routine that they develop of, like, once they kind of get together, they're not able to be in the same room until they've written, like, 2,000 words, and then they're not able to touch each other until they've gotten to the 4,000 word mark. Like, I love that their relationship is so, like, and they're so involved in each other that they have to set those limitations, but also that they're not so involved in each other. They do set those limitations, and they do, like, focus on their craft. And I love that the two of them actually do finish books, like, by the end of this. That was an amazing thing. I love that that's, like, they set out to teach each other about books and write these books and start this bet. And so I love that those books actually do get finished, and we do see that coming through, and it's not just like, oh, hey, let's write books, but, like, actually let's fall in love. So I love that. I love when January finds Gus's yearbook. It was just an amazing moment, and that whole scene was so great and so funny. I love their movie marathon when she was like, I decided I was going to fall asleep, like, on his shoulder right next to him on the couch. Like, that was great. Obviously the dancing in the rain we already talked about was amazing, and I loved it. And I love that January does, like, finally heal her relationship with her parents, and she reaches out to her mother, and she's like, I understand, and she reads all the letters from her father, and she's able to heal something that's so big in her life, and, like, we don't end with questions. That's what I like about this book, is we get a lot of our questions answered. We do see her healing her relationships. We do hear Gus's backstory. We do finish these books. Like, all of the things that are started that could easily get lost in the way of writing a romance actually do get finished, and so I love that. And that is a nice transition into the fact that I love how this book takes on the idea of romance and talks to readers about the genre of romance, because January talks about fighting sexism of women writing romance, and if a woman writes a book about a woman character, it becomes women's fiction, not general fiction. And I love that romance is seen as a real genre and not just like, oh, it's, whatever, like, it's not real writing, it's trashy. It's like, I love that they actually take it on and make it serious and show that it really is a thing. And, like, as somebody who gets relentlessly teased by my friends for my love of rom-coms and lack of standards, in quotes, about what I will read or watch, like, I love that this actually does address the fact that romance is real and it's good. And there's a quote I need to read from page 293, and it's when Gus is discussing romance and the fact that he really loves romance and he really does admire January for writing romance. And he talks about how when you love someone, this is all quotes from the book, when you love someone, he said haltingly, you want to make the world look different for them, to give all the ugly stuff meaning and amplify the good. That's what you do for readers, for me. You make beautiful things because you love the world, and maybe the world doesn't always look how it does in your books, but I think putting them out there changes the world a little bit, and the world can't afford to lose that. I've always admired that the way you're writing always makes the world seem brighter and the people in it seem a little braver. And so the way that he addresses that, and the way that he talks about how romance does make the world seem brighter and people seem braver, and yes, it's not always completely realistic, but it gives something to the world and it makes the world a brighter place by having that idealized world to see. It really does encapsulate my opinions about romance and why I love to read romance, because yes, I understand the world is not sunshine and rainbows and bad things happen, and it's not a romance novel, right? I'm never gonna have a perfect relationship, but that's why I love reading romance, because it is this idealized world. We do get to everything to work out. We do get to want things to be the best that they can be and get to see a world in which this works out, because it's like an escape, Shit doesn't always work out in the real world, but in romance, I can always count on shit to work out, except, like, when people die or whatever, but, like, it's so good, and I love that this book takes that on and really does make people understand it. And we get to see Gus coming out of his, romance snob kind of shell that we believe him to be in the beginning. And that arc really, I appreciate that we have that arc, because that's the arc that I want people in my life to go on, and I want people in my life to see, this put into words why I love romance so much. Because yes, I love the characters, and yes, I love the plot, and yes, I love that people are falling in love, and I'm a sucker for love stories, but this actually finally put into words why I am a sucker for love stories, because the world is a little brighter and the people are a little braver, and seeing that in our world that's not that, and that we have to come to terms with the fact that it's not that, it gives you an escape, and it makes the world a better place to at least have that escape and to see that, and to have a place, we have this place in romance where everything is going to be okay and things will work out and everything will be fine. And that's a lot of what I love, is things work out. I'm 95% of the time guaranteed a happy ending with romance. Or even if somebody dies, okay, I'm pretty sure this is The Best of Me, but Best of Me spoilers up ahead. In The Best of Me, is it The Best of Me? It's a Nicholas Sparks book, and I can't remember what the title is, but it's the one... Yes, it is Best of Me. Okay. Where, even though he dies in a bar fight, his heart goes to the love interest's son, who needs a heart transplant, and so he continues living on through them. And, that's the kind of shit that doesn't happen in the real world. But, Best of Me spoilers over, by the way, for anybody who skipped it. That's the kind of shit that doesn't happen in the real world, and so that's, why I love romance, because we do get that. And even though that was, quote-unquote, a sad ending, it was still happy, and there was a positive spin on it. And so I love that romance gives this positive light to the world, and, that's what I really appreciate about it. And so I love that this book gave me the right words to describe to people why I love romance, and I'm forever grateful for it for that, and I'm grateful for it for discussing romance as a real genre and not just writing it off, and I'm grateful for it for being an amazing book, and I love it. And it just, I think everybody should read it, especially people who maybe don't see romance as a real genre, or maybe are not a huge fan of romance. Read this book, see its take on romance, understand our point of view, and maybe then come back and make your judgment on romance and what it is as genre. But it just is amazing, and it gives a voice to so many things, and I love it. And it's not deep, it's not going to go down as a classic, it doesn't address current issues in society today, but that's what we love about romance. It makes the world a better place just by having it. Some books make the world a better place because they give voices to minority characters, and they talk about current social issues that need to be addressed that aren't being addressed. And I appreciate those books, and I can love those books too. But I also have a special place in my heart for romance, because romance makes the world a better place just by having a beautiful world for us to inhabit for a little bit of time. So I think everybody should read it. And if you could have seen me reading it, I just had the biggest grin on my face the entire time. It was just a beautiful experience, and I loved it. So yeah, I've been Maya Ghosh, and this has been my take on Beach Read by Emily Henry. Thanks for listening.